Good morning. We are going to start with some brief introductions, and then we're going to get going with our panel. Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not sure. I'll make sure we're on. Yeah, good to see you guys. Welcome to another Climate Week. My name is Mark Chambers. I've worn a lot of hats in a lot of different places. I think that most of the folks that I know here know me as, previously I was the Director of Sustainability for New York City, as well as spent time in the White House climate team. Most recently, I have taken on as the Executive Director of an ecological design and research nonprofit named Terraform One. We are designing against extinction, so excited to tell you all about that later.
Hello, I'm Lori Kerr. I'm the Principal Climate Advisor at the U.S. Green Building Council, and I've been working a lot on the development of LEED v5, which is out and available to be used. And prior to that, I worked in the same office that Mark Chambers worked in, but before him, on the plan to green the city of New York, Plan YC, and then the early energy efficiency ordinances that we developed under the Bloomberg administration.
My name is Dana Robin-Schneider, and I'm a Senior Vice President and Director of Energy and Sustainability at Empire State Realty Trust, and I've actually worked with most of these fine people on the panel on public-private partnerships, both with the Mayor's Office and with NYSERDA, the state.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah O'Keefe. I have the honor of serving for the City of Cleveland in the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and Climate Justice. I'm the director, and I lead a passionate team of people in things like the built environment. Excited to have our conversation today.
Hi, Michael Reed from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I work on our buildings group, so I work with fine folks such as Dana to make good shit happen.
Well, I'm glad we started right off with a solid word. Rhiannon Jacobson, U.S. Green Building Council. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for today's panel. I am our managing director for the U.S. So just to kind of set the stage and introduce the premise, certainly you've seen the name of this session. I'm making existing buildings focus for climate change. Obviously, we've got a sophisticated audience here at Solutions House. You've probably all heard the statistic, 1/3 of all emissions come from construction and buildings. Clearly, we feel at the U.S. Green Building Council that the time has more than come to really put the focus on and emphasis on existing buildings. Overall, we've had a discussion in advance of this panel. There are a lot of market drivers that are making this possible. We're excited to talk about that premise today, really understand some of the tools and the resources that you can access to make that happen, as well as the conditions that are happening at a market level that really make this possible. So with that said, I'm going to do my very best to open up for Q&A by the end of the session. So please be thinking of questions as we go, and I am sure that all of our panelists would be happy to answer questions also one-on-one afterwards. With that, I'm just going to call out the name of the session again, Making Existing Buildings the Next Big Thing for Climate. Are existing buildings already a big thing for climate? Are they getting the right amount of attention and emphasis? What are some of the strong signals for decarbonization that you're seeing? Does anybody want to start with that?
I'll jump in. Sure.
Great.
One thing that's happening in Cleveland, it's not quite as old as New York City, but it is a very old city. We have lots and lots of empty buildings. Our population has gone down to 380, holding steady. But it was a city built for 1 million people, right? So we're looking at a lot of public assets and other assets in the community that can be reused. And a great signal that I'm seeing, or that we're seeing, is that developers are reusing those buildings. We're doing adaptive reuse in Cleveland. One great example is our police headquarters, 250,000 square foot building built in 1920, going to use district heat, very cost efficient, and saving on per square foot for the development of that versus building new, which is the original plan. So that's really exciting.
That's great. Lori?
I would say no. They don't get the attention they deserve, and I think buildings in general don't. When people think of carbon emissions, they think about transportation and power plants. The cocktail conversation, people look at me blankly Like, buildings create carbon emissions?
That happens to me too.
They're not even moving. They're not smoking or anything. So people don't get it by and large. And then to the extent that they get it, it's new buildings. But existing buildings, as we know, are going to be like something like 80% of the buildings we'll have in 2050 are buildings we'll already have today. So is that always true, though, that they're not getting enough attention? No. In places like New York, Boston, Washington, St. Louis, there are ordinances to reduce the carbon emissions from buildings. So some isolated places, there's a lot of attention, but I would say in general, not enough.
I mean, I think one of the things that I've been most excited about, even though it hasn't actually come to fruition as clear as I would have liked, is the adaptive reuse of commercial office buildings for residential, right? So that's I think, post-pandemic, we got into this zone of recognizing that people prefer to be able to be at home when their packages arrive, and they like to be able to live a life that is not, fully disconnected from other things that make them happy. And so that means hybrid workforces are something that have been here to stay since the pandemic. Being able to look at how we use commercial real estate and adapting them for residential is not an easy task. The floor plates are gigantic. They're not easy to cut up and to make it easy for occupancy in that way. But it does hold a promise of how we can think about our downtown corridors to make them much more multi-use, making sure that people can kind of live in the spaces where they also work. I think that is, for me, remains one of the more interesting developments that I think helps us to really understand whether existing buildings can be utilized in a way where people have tangible benefits that they appreciate.
Absolutely.
Three quick points on what are drivers. I think we do have really aging infrastructure, so these buildings need to be modernized. The second is we have both changing climate and weather patterns, and then changing consumer preferences. So the need for more cooling, for example, is a significant opportunity for decarbonization. And then last but not least is the technological progress. If you were to look in 2017 at the heat pumps that were commercially available in New York City, and then you looked again today, you would see it would be like night and day. And I think that's continuing to move forward at quite a rapid clip.
So I would agree that buildings widely probably don't get the attention they deserve, but I think this panel, in all of our experiences, is probably skewed in that it's our career. Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? The same way I'm not a doctor, but I understand how important doctors are. I think that if you have the right codes and the right regulations and the right standards in the cities or states where the buildings are, and there are guidelines for those requirements, and there are people like us who continue to demonstrate the payback for making these kinds of investments in deep energy retrofits, then I think that's enough, right? I think as long as the people whose job it is to design and retrofit buildings, and the people whose job it is to ensure that those buildings meet the regulations and requirements where they are, and that those regulations and requirements continue to advance with technology and science, then I think that's okay. I don't think everybody in the world needs to. It's great if everybody understands how important this is, but as long as the people who are responsible for doing this work understand it and do it right, I think that's what's most important. And I think that, having panels like this to share our experience, hopefully with others who have an impact, to me is the most important thing.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Sarah and Michael, let's talk a little bit about the role of policy. There is a lot happening at the state and local levels, and what are some of those things that you're seeing? What are you seeing actually drive progress? What's happening in the city of Cleveland, the state of New York, that you would see as a positive, and of course, maybe a negative?
Sure, I'll take the local perspective from the city of Cleveland. Lori mentioned that a couple of cities, we always look at St. Louis because it's also Midwestern, right? And we like to compare ourselves to Midwestern cities because what I hear often in the city of Cleveland is like, oh, that's the East Coast. Oh, that's the West Coast when I talk about this work, right? I was like, no, St. Louis is in the Midwest solidly. So we can do this in Cleveland, actually, and it's been done. So what we're thinking about and talking about is benchmarking, right? We don't have mandatory benchmarking. That's the first step. We have voluntary benchmarking. We're going to mandatory benchmarking. We want to have building performance standards. And something that's very exciting that's happening now, even though the funding has been pulled for it through the Reiki grant, is we're working with 3 other Ohio cities to do building performance standards. The 3 Cs, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. I won't be offended if you call me Cincinnati or Columbus. They're great cities, too. Dayton is the other one that we're working with. And even the city of Akron, which is also part of the 25 Cities Initiative. We're all working together to think about how we can do this in Ohio, a state that is not friendly towards this kind of action, right? So that's very exciting, and it's the role of local government to participate and push that envelope. We need to offer services and be responsible for our communities. And we have local policies that can help us do that, especially in the built environment. We are converting a office building it's right next door to City Hall, and it's residential, and it's so exciting. We have a couple of those projects, but people developing them don't always say, I'm doing with this for decarbonization. But the fact is, that's what's happening, and that is very exciting. So I agree, it's totally my job and my team's job to make sure that we bring that in, and we're like, yes, this is great that you're reusing this building. P.S. It helps us on decarbonization. I'm really excited about the embodied carbon credit for LEED V5. I'll leave it there.
Excellent.
So in terms of New York State, I think I'd want to situate us in that the city and the state passed their really ambitious climate policies in 2019. And so we're about 5 years into what is a multi-generational transition. And we're really blessed in New York State that everybody who pays into their electric utility bill contributes to what's called the system benefit charge. And that goes into a pot of money that's overseen by our regulator, the Public Service Commission, and is used to fund energy efficiency and building electrification programs. I bore you with those bureaucratic details because it's been very relevant in this last year as we've seen significant backsliding on the federal level, that we at New York State are somewhat insulated from all of the federal activity because we have this state level pot of funding and infrastructure to build with. And to that point, over the last 5 years, we've really been trying to work with industry leaders, such as one of the people sitting on this panel, to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, and to actually build these sorts of retrofits in existing buildings, in dense environments, in cold climates, to show what success can look like. And we're just now, it's hard to believe that it takes 5 years to get to the point where stuff is actually getting installed, but that's where we are right now in terms of the New York State transition, is we're just beginning to see the first wave of post-Local Law 97 projects, if you will, with some really great lessons learned and some things we don't want to do anymore, right? So, I mean, that's what happens when you're at the early stage of a transformation like this.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts about the role of policy from folks on the panel?
I mean, I'll just add one little piece. I do think, kind of building on Michael's point about the change in support from the federal government, is that, you know, don't underestimate the value add, though, of some of the kind of federal presence in those cities to also be able to be of assistance. One of the things that we were very active in doing, and like I look for some wood to knock on that it hasn't been like repealed yet, is developing a federal building performance standard. So one of the big ideas during the Biden term was to allow for the federal government, in addition to a number of other policies, to establish a building performance standards, which basically reduced and set a goal of having zero Scope 1 emissions for 30% of the federal portfolio. And the federal presence is gigantic, as you can imagine, across the country. So being able to look at where those examples still are present, and where they are doing the decarbonization work as part of mission of maintaining those assets, is a great way for some of the local policies to also be able to look at the federal presence as an example and potentially share some resources in that decarbonization.
Great. All right, let's move from public sector to private sector. So Dana, obviously we can see an enormous opportunity to really align, but also go beyond where policy is taking us or has taken us, and increase overall profitability and value. What are some of the things Empire State is doing at a single asset and portfolio level by way of resilience, energy, emissions reduction, and an overall sustainability focus and effort? Are you seeing a return on these activities? And are you seeing a return on investment that goes beyond utility savings and includes reduced cost of capital?
Wow, that's a lot of questions in one question.
It's like 5 questions.
Remind me if I leave any of them out. So I think it's really important to begin at the beginning for us. So we actually began our work to prove or disprove the business case for investing in deep energy retrofits in existing buildings in 2007, right? And so I think it's extremely important for our work, right, answers only, solutions only, to focus on the fact that these are very practical solutions. So every single building, every new building, and every new building is an existing building the second someone moves into it. I say this all the time. They're all existing buildings. And frankly, we can correct a lot of the assumptions of a new building as soon as the people move into it too. And that's one of the challenges of the USGBC, right? What new construction planning looks like versus what an existing building occupied looks like is 2 different things. So I think it's extremely important to talk about existing building performance from a practical perspective, that every single building has massive infrastructure that needs to be maintained, that needs to be retro-commissioned, that needs to be served in real time, and then ultimately replaced at the end of its useful life. If we just take that basic requirement for all buildings, we'll understand that there's a very smart way to do that kind of work, and that's what we've been doing since the beginning, is understanding the entire performance of an asset. Every one of our buildings, including the Empire State Building, has a calibrated energy model. It's within 1% accurate. We know exactly how these buildings perform. We understand exactly what equipment is in that building. We track it in real time. We understand how old it is, age, condition, when it's at the end of its useful life, and also can we retrofit it? Can we reuse it? When's it time to replace it? What are the right steps to take at those times? We look at whole building efficiency because that has an excellent payback, right? The third most expensive expense for a tenant, for example, is utilities, right? It's salaries, and then rent, and then utilities. We focus in on these expenses. This is how much we pay for these things. So when we look at replacing a piece of equipment or upgrading a piece of equipment in time, we look at how we can get the best return on our investment. We're a publicly traded company. Saving energy, being more environmentally responsible, reuse, doing it at the right time, that's how you get the best payback. We've demonstrated the business case over and over and over now for 18 years. Every time we've looked at a building, every time we've looked at a tenant space, every time we've looked at a piece of equipment, no matter what, there's always a business case to do it better. And so my work with NYSERDA and with the mayor's office and writing our benchmark laws, our green codes with Mayor Bloomberg in 2005 to 2007, all of us took our expertise and lended that success story and experience to laws that we hoped would be effective, impactful, and practical. And it's very important to always come back to that, right? We do good when we do this work, but we also make money when we do this work, and that's why it's still good for publicly traded companies, non-publicly traded companies, cities, and states to do this work. It's better for the economy, and it's better for the health of the people in the cities.
Excellent, excellent. Mark, we discussed that there are significant opportunities, but also significant challenges. Can you talk about what's blocking momentum and what some of those challenges might be?
Sure. So, again, small question.
Only answers.
Yeah, only answers. Got it. Right. I mentioned before I have and continue to wear a lot of hats. So both at all levels of government, whether it's from City Hall to the White House, from philanthropy to impact investment organizations, and now in the nonprofit space. And all of those things, I think it comes down to 2 or 3 areas where you're always going to have these obstacles, and the question is, like, how do we unpack them a little bit more clearly? And that's skills, scale, and scope, right? So on the skills side, I think that we know that there is a future that we are moving towards that is electrified. It is electrified based on 24-hour like renewables, right? Like that's where things are moving. That's what allows for the buildings to be able to operate, but also to do so like with certainty that you're able to have all of the functions inside like working the way you want them to. But that requires more electricians, it requires more pipe fitters, it requires more services for small and medium-sized businesses who are doing a lot of the retrofit work. It requires us to have like a really strong theory of the case around education and around making sure that we are filling the skill gap that will be necessary to be able to do the massive work for retrofitting the existing buildings, same way we're advocating for the construction of new buildings. And I think that is something that there needs to be a certain amount of attention paid towards if we're going to be able to meet the moment, right? And that also includes being able to activate the private sector around internships and around bringing on staff from a myriad of interdisciplinary and diverse backgrounds to make sure that you're actually pulling in a workforce that can meet the moment in a lot of different ways. That's, I think, on the skills side, a huge obstacle, something that requires a lot of investment. And a lot of insight and help from the trades and unions is also important there. On the scale side, I think that we all benefit from having economies of scale with doing this. You know, you want for the incentives that NYSERDA is putting out, or the work that Empire State is implementing to benefit from reduced costs of implementation and deployment. And that comes from there being a lot of people doing the same kind of work at the same time. There was a game plan to be able to do that, right? I think one of the things that I think is important for folks to recognize, because a lot of work went into a lot of the potential deployment around the pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in particular was a $27 billion investment into this actual work, right? This was the work to create a long-term revolving green bank that would allow for investments to go into communities all across the country to assist with this type of deployment. That money then being paid back to the federal government and redeployed. That was the goal, and that's come to an end, right? I think everyone kind of acknowledging and recognizing that getting a scale is important, and it's also much more difficult without a constructive and an active federal partner to be able to help deploy some of those funds. So scale is also a challenge. And then the last part is scope. And like I say scope, but what I really mean is ambition or vision. The way I describe it is like, what happens on the other side of crisis? Like, what are we moving towards? What is the goal that we envision for how we want to live together? Who we want to live with, how we want everyone to thrive? All of that is part of setting an ambition for our urban environments in particular. A lot of the work that I'm doing now at Terraform One has a lot to do with being able to envision a future that is abundant for multi-species. It's not just about how we live in our buildings, but how those buildings can also provide habitats and provide resources for additional living life that we share this with. I think when we're looking at rebuilding our environments, our human habitats, we have the ability to improve upon what we've done before. And doing that and acknowledging that we don't just operate completely separate from nature, I think is incredibly important. And it's how we get it right and create more opportunity for us to move towards a future that is, I think, much more in line with a lot of the underpinnings that we've really been working hard over the last few decades to establish, which is that we can actually build an environment for everyone that allows for all people to thrive and not have to live far away from where you work and not have to be able to to separate the different parts of you that you want to contribute towards this kind of collective. So between those things, I would say, again, skills, scale, and scope, those are the places where we find a lot of the challenges and difficulties, and if will require attending to all of those in order for us to be able to create more opportunity for the deployment of a lot of the resources that everyone here is representing.
Right, so skills, scale, scope. What else is missing? What else is challenged?
I would say we haven't had the tools to achieve deep decarbonization. Our industry for the last 50 years, since the energy crises of the 1970s, has been focused on energy efficiency. And a lot's been done on that, and it's been fairly successful. And we have our tools there of benchmarking, audits, retro-commissioning, and they work pretty well for that. But we have a new problem now, and it's really getting to very low carbon, and that's quite different than saving energy. Although they're cousins, they're not siblings, and they're not identical. They're not identical twins, even more. So we at the U.S. Green Building Council, and in partnership with NYSERDA as well, we've been creating the new tools that can help us in this transition. One tool that we did with NYSERDA and ASHRAE is a guide to strategic decarbonization planning. As people up here have been saying, this is a long-term process that buildings go through. So you've got to create these plans because if you don't do this over the long haul, it's unaffordable. So that's now available on ASHRAE's website and available to everybody. We are also about to launch a workbook, which, so if the guide explains how, as a kind of how-to, the workbook standardizes the input for everybody in the industry, and that also will be made available to everybody. And then the last piece of this is promoting it, and LEED v5 has a 4-point credit for doing strategic decarbonization plans. So we're hoping those three altogether help us with this paradigm shift that the industry is going through.
Excellent. Lori, you segued directly into my next question. Are there any other highlights for LEED version 5 that you think the audience should know about?
Oh gosh, there are so many.
So many.
Well, getting out of my lane, which is always about operational carbon, let's talk about other carbon. For refrigerants, for example, this is something that's a little different. We're asking all buildings to do refrigerant inventories and see how much they're leaking. So we're going to know a lot more about refrigerants. Similarly, on embodied carbon, all new buildings have to do an assessment of their major embodied carbon. So we're going to have a lot more information about that going forward.
Excellent, excellent.
But it's not all about carbon, but that's for another panel.
Possibly later this week.
Yes.
Any other pieces by way of challenges or elements that you're seeing possibly in LEED or in other constructs that you're excited about?
Can I just pause on the skills part that Mark was talking about? I think something that's really neat there is that even absent the scale and scope, right, the good federal partner, the investment, that $27 billion, the skill part is very important. We in Cleveland are focused on training in the built environment. We have a built environment collaborative, it's called, and it is functioning in all of the ways that you described, right? It is cross many different disciplines. We have unions involved. We have small MBEs and FBEs and small business enterprises all involved. We have our Greater Cleveland Works, our Workforce Development Board is leading it. We invested $10 million of ARPA funding to get that off the ground. And the great thing is that even not having the scope, the skill set and making sure that we're training and using the tools that Lori's describing is so key. I think the assault on education and skill building right now is, we have to fight that as much as possible. And I think as a not a federal government, as a local government, we have the ability to do that and partner with our public schools and all of our schools and make sure that these skills trainings stay in place and so that we don't lose that momentum once the scale and scope come back. I'll be optimistic here. And then I just wanted to also thank you for highlighting the ASHRAE tools. I think that's really exciting. And those are things that we need to talk about. You said what's missing. I think conversation with everybody on a daily basis sometimes we get really wonky in these rooms, and I love it. But communicating that to a builder and a small one in particular is not always easy. So I am excited about that too.
Right.
I'll plug one more piece because I think Sarah reminded me of this. It also starts earlier. So yes, there's the importance of skilled trades and folks working that can immediately enter the workforce. But another program we have at Terraform is something called the One Lab, which focuses on high school age education, making the makers, making sure that we are in a place where we are facilitating the curiosity that allows for young people that are entering into their next educational components or they're moving into at a point where they're going to make decisions about how they want to contribute to this kind of great generational work of changing our built environment. That starts early. So ways in which you're able to elicit curiosity, I think, is important, and utilizing your work environments, your projects to introduce or to at least change the narrative around what it looks like to include younger generations into this work is incredibly important, and it starts now if we're going to be able to have the workforce to be able to deliver a lot of these amazing changes.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
Affordability is incredibly important in this whole topic. So I think that we're in a moment right now where we need to be laser focused on project economics and what makes sense to the people who are actually buying this stuff. And I think that too often in the past, we maybe let idealism lead, and now we got to focus on solving problems. And I think that's across the spectrum. But in particular, we need to see, on this topic of public-private partnerships or partnerships more broadly, we need to see this stuff become easier for folks like Dana to say yes to. You should not have to take 3 hours to figure out what it is you're trying to sign up for. And 3 hours is obviously a generous statement, right, Dana?
Yes. Yes. So I would agree that one of the challenges is to make it easier. Another challenge, I think, is to communicate to the public much more clearly and simply and succinctly why this is important and how it benefits them, right? And I actually don't see any of this as a negative, right? I mean, there's some big challenges right now, but I think we have to stay focused on what we're trying to do. Like I said in the beginning, my whole career, which is longer than I'd like to admit now, so for 26 years, and then all my time in school was always focused actually on this kind of work, right? Sustainable buildings, sustainable design, efficient buildings, always, engineering. And so I can say in that entire time, since the 90s, there has never been, ever, a national grid in the US. There's never been a United States of America federal energy standard. There never was one, right? And we still have this movement, right? And so obviously there's some setbacks right now, but I think that the most important two things that we have always looked at and still look at is the technical case and the economic case, right? And idealism doesn't need to go away. Our job is to take our goal and prove it's technically and economically possible. The simpler and easier and more accessible and more affordable we can make that, the better. And so all my work with the people on this panel that I've worked with for years has been to do that, right? To demonstrate using our buildings and the most famous building in the world that these solutions work. They are better answers than the baseline answer you would typically choose, right? And we make that comparison all the time. Well, here's what typically would be done that's code compliant when this chiller needs to be replaced. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how much more money we make and more money we save and a more resilient, modern, safer environment, healthier environment, that we provide for the people in the building, right? So it's really a no-brainer. The idea is just making it simpler and getting the message out there.
Excellent. we're answering part of my next question, but I think that there's even more to it. So obviously, we've got experts here from private, public, NGO, overall leading this industry. What do we do to come together more so that the people that are not in this room understand really the value proposition, why this is important, the imperative behind it, and how they can access it? And so we're talking about things like affordability. We're also talking about speaking to people outside of the echo chamber. What are some of those other elements that we need to do and really can't fail on in order to bring this to scale?
I'll go first only because I think it might lead to what everybody else might say. Because I always thought, and I don't know if that's right, that the case studies would be the most important piece, that showing this works and sharing it publicly would move the needle enough. And we do. We share everything we do in all of our buildings publicly. We share what works, what doesn't work, why it doesn't work, what didn't work in 2010, and then we were able to do 2 years later because of advances in the market and advances in the technology, right? We share all of that. And Michael and I specifically work really closely together on those things. And now I wonder if I still think that's the right way, but we have to make sure that we also convey those case studies, I think, in a more accessible way. And we've tried to do that, right? We've tried to issue them in ways that we literally published our case studies with NYSERDA in a way that says, okay, for the CEO, here's what we did. It's less than 1 page, 5 points. And for the manager of the work, the executive who would run it, here's 10 points. And then for the architects and engineers who will design this work, here's the full workbook of everything you need to do, which all of us have worked on all of these different phases. So I really think still that the case studies being accessible, getting into schools, getting to children in elementary schools so they know these are careers that are viable, in high school, and really also supporting VOTEC and the unions so that people know how to build this, so that the architects, engineers, and the practitioners, the union members or non-union members who are skilled laborers who do this kind of work, right? Experts in electrical or plumbing or mechanical work. We need that. And I think that demonstrating that these jobs can only be done locally are always American jobs, that they do support the growth in every single place where there are buildings, which is everywhere in America, and getting that message out that this is good for everyone, right? It's good for jobs, it's good for the economy, it's better for the buildings, it's better for their efficiency, it makes them more resilient and modern, it's great across the board, and there's a payback in the investments for the owners.
Excellent.
It sounds so easy. I don't know why people don't do it more.
I don't know that they always read the case studies.
Well, I think
and code, I think is really important.
Yes, absolutely. I think the way that you've laid it out, though, Dana, with here's the CEO version here, the management version here is the techie folks version. That is masterful, and I think. Yeah,
I don't know if it's working.
I want to use this. I haven't used it yet. So I think for public buildings, the same thing, but it's taxpayers instead of investors, right? And so I would double down on all of what you said. Yeah.
And then code, which I think all these guys can talk to even more, but I cannot. It is wonky, but it is also the great equalizer. So when energy codes are updated everywhere to reflect the newest version, you may or may not be shocked that many cities and municipalities around the U.S. are referencing decade-old code, which is silly. And so even something simple like what New York City and New York State are going through currently, which will have an updated code at the end of December for New York that aligns with the city and aligns with the state, that really should be the version of ASHRAE and IECC the whole country references. So I actually think if we could all advocate, whatever city you're in, to make sure the code says that, that'll take care of the new buildings. But we still need to deal with existing.
Absolutely.
One of the things, you're talking about collaboration, one of the really extraordinarily good things about this moment that I'm seeing, it's this moment of great transition, this paradigm shift, and I have never seen the industry move so quickly toward consensus and toward collaboration. Like we presented the guide to strategic decarbonization planning this morning at BX, and also the work that NYSERDA is doing with RMI and ULI. It's all very much aligned. And I think this is very heartening, that the industry gets it. They get that we don't have time to come together and dither over every little piece. You know, we're going to use the same terminology. RMI shifted their terminology to align with ours, or if they hadn't, we should have done likewise. You know, so I'm very excited by that the industry really gets it, gets the urgency, and is really working together toward a common vision and common tools and so on. I think that's going to help a lot.
And I'll just add, I would say that I would encourage everyone to think about your building solving more than just one problem, right? It's like you can, the part of the opportunity to retrofit buildings is an opportunity, yes, the physicality of that building, but it's also programmatically whether or not that building is solving more than one problem. You know, we are not just in a crisis that relates to the efficiency of our asset class of buildings, but we're also in an affordability crisis. We are also in a housing crisis. Like, those things are the intersection and Venn diagram that all of the users of these buildings are experiencing. So being able to look at a building's ability to help ameliorate some of those challenges or to contribute to building a more supportive ecosystem for the location, the neighborhood, the region in which they sit is a programmatic part that can still have a return on investment, but it also makes a decision that you want this building to, again, create a more abundant environment for its occupants. And that means you know, not just the people going in there, but people benefit when your environment is less caustic to the world around it. So you put green roofs on a building. Yes, it has a thermal performance, but it's also creating like an incredible ecosystem that people benefit from, and so do other species. The same thing exists for thinking about your facades and thinking about the ways in which a building can support life, and a way in which that building can also become much more supportive to the ways in which the users are actually experiencing their lives, and not just the part of the program that you were responsible before retrofit. So thinking about the experience of other people and thinking about how this building can support them through the work that's taking place is particularly important, and I think will help us do it better, so that 10 years from now, when we're at, you know, Solutions House 2035, we'll be able to have a slightly different conversation about what we are expecting of the buildings at that point.
Right. All right, to the audience, we have just enough time for at least one, maybe two questions. Anybody have a burning, pressing one? And I believe we have a microphone. Actually, let's just go ahead. I can always...
Hi, my name is Tina. I'm actually from Cleveland, so...
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tina, I can't see you. Hi, Sarah.
My question is a little bit biased because I work a lot with commercial real estate owners and NYSERDA. And so my question is directed to everyone on the panel at large. We've seen commercial real estate specifically working with LEED and developing different versions for building certifications and working with tenants in programs like Local 97 and Demand Response, being able to lead the stride in decarbonization and energy efficiency. How do we mimic the success that we've seen across the city in other sectors, specifically residential? I have friends who live in buildings who are like, I don't know how I can decarbonize this. I don't know if we have the capital to do it. Is the answer working with the government? Is the answer working federally? How do average people who are not in the built environment space like us mimic that success?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question. One thing I would just emphasize is like standardization and scale, right? Like, at the end of the day, if you go to a New York City multifamily building in the dead of winter, their windows are open because they're miserable because the steam heater is way too hot, right? So the baseline is not good. But yeah, right now, you could require an engineer. We need to get to a point where you can just go on Amazon and buy a cool heat pump that can fit into your window, maybe provide some ventilation improvements. So I think we're getting there. In the near term, I would emphasize that the New York City does have like a whole shop called the Accelerator, which is entering into its third phase. And that's a really useful resource and is specifically focused on this challenge. So I think the role that cities have to help educate and equip tenants with actionable information is paramount.
And utilities too.
And utilities.
Like your all utilities, all Con Ed included, but utilities all around the country all have really good programs and free tips for energy efficiency for commercial and residential always. They use their list, and they have incentives for a lot of the equipment or new appliances you would ever buy too.
I'm going to throw municipal utilities out there also because we have a nice muni called Cleveland Public Power, and we work with them, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, on the educational piece and what programs might be available. And we're co-creating programs as we move forward. Yeah, so it's
Great free tools.
Yeah.
One more.
Hi. Yes. My name is Noelle Graham. I am here representing Urban Environmentalists Los Angeles. We are a volunteer advocacy group of urban planners and biologists trying to make a better built environment in Los Angeles. I'd love to hear y'all's experience about strategies you've seen. First, I appreciate how much you're talking about we need to get the general public involved in what we're doing here. I want to hear y'all's perspectives on strategies or anecdotal experiences you've had where you've gotten somebody on board with your side.
No one's gotten anyone on board?
I did not fully hear the question. I apologize.
She's asking a story on how we were able to get somebody on board with what we wanted to achieve, basically.
Yeah. Stories, anecdotes, examples.
Well, I think like one classic example in the world of bigger buildings is you might have a great idea for an energy efficiency project, but if your building operator or chief doesn't want to do it, good luck making that happen. And I think that, you know, to toot Dana's horn a little bit, they did a really good job with their Empire State Building project and other projects, bringing those folks in at the very early stage and not treating them like a token, but asking them deep questions and trying to make sure that what they said was resonant in the solution that was put forward. And I think that we see examples of that time and time again, where if you're not engaging the folks that are running the building, the project dies. But if you do a good job bringing them along with you, concerns about, you know, technology making folks obsolete or whatever kind of go away through relationships and dialogue.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? You just reminded me of a story. Yes, 100%, 200%. You have to engage the building operators, facilities managers, facilities teams know their stuff. And a lot of times they're excited about learning new things, but they haven't been talked to about those new things, and they haven't been trained on those new things. Nobody's offering training, so it's scary and big. So having those conversations, and I have found that at the table and having some conversations, when there's a big group around, they'll be like, no, no, no. But then I am in the elevator going after the meeting after the meeting, and they'll be like, oh, you know what? My grandson loves sustainability, and they're going to study that in school. How do they get involved? I'm like, okay, here's a pathway for me to talk about sustainable building. So that works also. So those kinds of personal stories, yes, they're very great to connect with people.
And you have to make the case, most importantly, to the person investing in the work. So I can't say enough, like every person at every stage, you have to meet them where they are and identify all the stakeholders up front and understand what they'll need to hear in order for them to say yes. Your job is to get them to say yes, and your job is to get all the information you need to make each of those critical stakeholders, from the building engineer to the CEO to the board, say yes. And each of them need a slightly different case, and it's your job to make sure you have all the data to make that case.
Excellent. With that, I want to thank you all for prioritizing the session today. Thank you for helping make existing buildings the next big thing for climate change. Have a wonderful rest of Climate Week. Enjoy. Thank you.